Bruins hit rock bottom this past season, and now it's all about bounce back. Today we have Andy Brickley here to break it all down.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be. Today is Wednesday, June 25th, and this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We've got a great episode for you today as I am joined by former Bruins player and longtime NESN analyst Andy Brickley. We're diving into the Bruins' current state, their new direction under Marco Sturm, what comes next this offseason. We're also going to start with Andy's own journey in black and gold, and I am very excited to have him on the show today. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years now. And before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. That's on Blue Sky, X, Instagram, Threads, even TikTok. You can find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Again, very excited to have Andy Brickley here on Locked On Boston Bruins. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and today is a special one. So without further ado, let's get to my chat here with Andy Brickley of NESN. All right, I am thrilled to be joined today on the podcast by a former Bruin, a longtime NESN analyst. Andy Brickley needs no introduction to Boston Bruins fans. Andy, how are you doing today, and what's going on down there where you're at?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been a long off season already.
Yes.
Given the way things went a year ago. But, I usually enjoy my summers. I enjoy my time off. I mean, it's all I've ever known, right? Came right out of college, turned pro, played pro hockey for 14 years and been in this business ever since. So I've always had time off in the summer, and I generally make good use of it.
Yeah, you've got like a teacher schedule going on with winter's busy, summer's off.
Yeah.
Speaking of your hockey background, I always like to ask people when they come on the podcast kind of your hockey origin story. How did you get into the game? I'm guessing as a kid, and who did you kind of idolize growing up watching hockey?
Okay, I grew up about 10 miles north of the Garden.
Okay.
My first, all the way through first grade, I lived in Malden. My dad was a Malden firefighter for 30 plus years,
Oh, wow.
Was a Quincy girl. And so I grew up in Malden, then moved to Melrose, the next town over, in second grade. So because of the proximity to Boston, because of what was happening in the hockey world at that time, meaning I was born in 1961. So I was 8 and 10 when the Bruins were winning the Cups in 70 and 72. And I think anybody of my generation wanted to play hockey. That's when that major growth of the game of hockey in Boston really took off. I know the Bruins are always there and they're legendary, and, we just celebrated 100 years. But when Orr and Esposito and company took over this town, and they had such personality, such swagger, such talent, such success, that everybody of my generation wanted to play hockey. Even if you couldn't skate, you were playing street hockey up at the park or in the street, in the driveway. So I was of that environment, loved the sport, loved the game. Those guys were my heroes. I wanted to be them. I wanted to play in the NHL. I wanted to play for the Boston Bruins. So that is the origin of, and I was from a big family, bigger families, large number of children were more prevalent back in those days as compared to now. So I was one of 7. I had 4 brothers. So we had our own little team if we ever wanted to play anybody else in the neighborhood. So, and then there was internal competition amongst the brothers, as always is the case in a competitive athletic family. So that was the origin. And that's where my love of the game of hockey, it started with those Bruins. Even though I loved every sport, played every sport. And that's one of the messages I always try to deliver to kids when I have an opportunity to speak to youth groups and in hockey camps. Play everything. It'll make you a better hockey player. If you play basketball, lacrosse, tennis, whatever it might be, whatever you love, play it all and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. That origin story is similar to mine, but maybe obviously a generation earlier. I was in that 8 to 10 age range in the late 80s, early 90s. The Bruins, I've told the story a lot on the podcast, but that 1990 team, my sister, who's a bit older, she was a Oilers fan, a Marc Messier fan.
What?
My dad grew up in the same kind of loving Bobby Orr, just living down the road from Oshawa, Ontario. And so when the Oilers played the Bruins in the final, I just really leaned into that Bruins fandom just to be an annoying little brother. But that team, that era is the era that I love so much. You were part of that team.
Yeah.
How did that kind of playing in that time, playing in Boston, how did that shape your view of the game and your approach to broadcasting and how you kind of look at the game these days and the current version of the Bruins?
Yeah, to answer that, I'm going to take it back a little further. When I turned pro, I left the University of New Hampshire a year early after my junior year. I thought I was ready for the NHL. I needed some time in the American League to learn how to be a professional hockey player, and that was a great experience. But that being said, the teams I played for before I came to Boston, so I had a taste from Philadelphia. They're the ones that drafted me.
Right.
They taste the NHL. But then the second year after I played that first year in the American League, I was part of a trade, and I went to Pittsburgh. And this was pre-Mario.
Right.
And Pittsburgh was the worst team in the league. In fact, they might have been extinct if they didn't get Mario.
Right.
Saved that franchise on more than one occasion, but this time as a player. So I was on a bad Pittsburgh team, and then I became a free agent. I signed with New Jersey. New Jersey was a bad team. So in the first 6 or 7 years of my career, I never played in the NHL playoffs. I was missing out. Right. I loved the game. I loved the sport. I loved the life. I loved the competition, but I wanted to be part of what everybody told me was a different sport when it came to hockey when you get into the postseason. But that last year in Jersey, 87, 88, were the first time that Jersey made the playoffs. And we had a special group, and we were together, and we had to be. We had a lot of young, really talented guys like Kirk Muller, Pat Verbeek, Johnny McClain, Kenny Danick, that group of players. And we made the playoffs. We had to do it on the last game of the regular season. I wouldn't have done it. We had to win. We had to win in overtime in Chicago, and we qualified. And then we took off. We won the first 2 rounds. We ended up playing the Bruins in the conference final, and it went the full 7 for those that remember. And it was a 3-2 game in the third period before the Bruins put us away. And I thought, wow, I'm part of the foundation of this Devils team that's going to go on to do great things. Well, I was left unprotected that September in the waiver draft, and the Bruins claimed me. And that's how I came to Boston. And at the time, I was unsure if this was a good thing or not, because I was leaving a very special situation, a special season, something that was really building in New Jersey.
Right.
But I came to Boston, my hometown team, the team I idolized, the team I always paid attention to, even as an NHL player, always seeing how the Bruins do and who's playing well for them. And it changed my life forever for the better.
Right.
And so that was my first experience being part of this organization. And even though that first year was pretty good, now keep in mind, they just lost, that playoff in the final to Edmonton in 88.
Yep.
And it was a bit of an adjustment year. Terry O'Reilly was the coach. It was going to be his last year. His son was struggling health-wise. There was a lot on his plate. And the Bruins were kind of in a transition. How do we get better from the 88 team so that we can beat a team like Edmonton in 89, 90, whatever it took? And I wanted to be part of that, obviously. I had to earn my job. I had to earn my spot in the lineup. I wasn't going to replace anybody right away just because I came in the waiver draft. They just lost in the final. So that was a good challenge for me. But by the time we got to the following year, when we won the President's Trophy, and you had 2 absolute studs in Ray and Cam, and then you take a look at that team, I remember the phrase, puck moving defenseman came up. It came up like 10 years later. When you look at that team in 90, you talk about puck-moving defensemen, starting with Raymond. Yep. Gary Galley blossomed into an awesome play. Glenn Wesley was a terrific skater and puck mover. Donnie Sweeney was on that team. Greg Hoggard, Michael Telvin, Gordy Kluzek. We had puck-moving defensemen. And as a forward, guys that know how to pass the puck in the back end. Oh man, that is fun. That's
Mhm.
fun. And we were deep. We had talent. We had third line guys that would be second or first line guys on a lot of teams in that league at that time. So that 90 team was the pinnacle of the years that I was in Boston. The only problem was we had to play Edmonton in the final.
Yep.
Game 1 is still a bad memory. Peter Klima. And then in 91 and 92, we lose in the conference finals too. Mario,
Penguins.
Pittsburgh
Yep.
Penguins. They were a wagon. They were absolute wagon. No salary cap in those days. You could go acquire anybody you wanted as long as you were willing to pay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those two teams in particular got in our way of what we wanted to accomplish, was a Stanley Cup. But those years, late 80s, early 90s, Bruins hockey, I was a proud member of that group, and we were. I don't know if we were beloved, but I think the fans enjoyed the way we played. They enjoyed our social abilities around town. We were very accessible. And I think that's important, too, when you talk about the Bruins and what they mean to this town.
For sure, yeah. I mean, back then I was living up here in Ontario, in Ottawa, pre-Senators. My dad passed down the Bruins fandom to me, and that era is certainly what sealed the love of hockey for me. And maybe we'll touch on it later, but I'm so thrilled that they're bringing back that classic Spoke to Be full-time coming up this season.
Yeah. The other thing, Ian, too, is that, fighting was such a bigger part of the game back then. And we were tough too. I mean, you don't sleep on Jay Miller. You don't sleep on Lyndon By.
Even Cam.
So we had skill, we had talent, we had speed, we had depth. We had Milbury came in those 2 years there, in 90 and 91, and we had the goaltending, Lemelin, Moog. We just had every element of the game, and we could play a tough game, we could play a physical game, we could play a grind game. You had talent down the middle. Bobby Sweeney, very underrated player. Randy Burridge, as competitive as there were. The list is long, and you don't want to leave anybody out when you think about those teams, but everybody had a role. Everybody accepted their role. Everybody relished their roles. And that's why we were as good as we were.
Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in about 15 minutes. And effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL and use code LockedOnNHL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL and use promo code LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. For sure, yeah. Just great times for sure. Now, I don't think we need to I think this past season has been kind of broken down. There were so many ingredients in the soup that made them fall down to where they were. I want to kind of look a bit forward and start with the new head coach. You've seen him as a player, Marco Sturm stepping in after an incredibly down year for the Bruins. What's your first impressions of the hire, and what do you think he will bring to the team to help kind of turn things around here quickly, hopefully?
Yeah, well, I would begin with this. The last season and the reasons for the lack of success, it started right at the very beginning, and I'll get to Marco in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But when you enter the season, 3 issues on the business side. You had a head coach with no contract moving forward. You had a captain with no contract heading forward. And then you made a trade for one of your goaltenders in the best goaltending tandem in the league, which set up leverage for the other goaltender, and he was a holdout in training camp.
Yeah.
And training camp itself was poor and disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really a difficult job for for Montgomery to pull that all together, keep it together, and thrive. And you saw it in the record. But as far as Marco goes, now you got a guy, he's got a contract, he's got a long-term deal, relatively speaking, when it comes to coaching in this business. And he's a guy that has no shortage of belief in himself that he is the man for the job. And I admire that. As a player, we had him here for 5 years, this during my TV part of my career. And he was a stand-up guy. He played the game the right way. He scored a lot of goals between the dots for guys his size, and they were big goals. I think that speaks to his character when you talk about him as a player. Never shirked the media. Always stood up and had an answer to a question, and it was a thoughtful answer. It wasn't just canned. And I think he went about. I'll call it chasing. I don't like that verb, but in preparing himself for a head coaching job in the NHL, he went about it the right way. And again, that speaks to who he is. He ran that German national program, which impressive to win a silver in the Olympics with Team Germany. And in a short tournament, and that tells me he's good with X's and O's, and he got the players to buy in. Two very important.
Without Draisaitl, too. Without the best players.
Right. And then he makes the transition to the National Hockey League. And he puts his time in, he puts his work in. Coaching is long hours. It's a lot of video. It's a lot of one-on-one. It's a lot of dealing with multiple personalities and egos. And that's a learned skill. And he was assistant coach for 6-7 years in LA. He worked with different head coaches. He learned from different head coaches. And then the next step was to go be a head coach yourself in the American Hockey League, which he did. Yep. And he had, relative success doing that. Because you have to have a voice, you have to have control of that locker room, but yet you have to still understand today's players and how to get the best out of them. And it's more of a partnership now than being a tyrant like it might have been back when I was playing.
Right. Yeah.
You didn't get on the wrong side of Terry O'Reilly or Mike Milbury. So I'm optimistic about the hire. I think the Bruins did their due diligence. I think it's a very important hire for Donnie Sweeney that he get it right.
Yeah.
But when you talk to Marco Sturm, he has so much belief that not only is he the right man for the job at the right time, but he understands the game. He has the ability to get the most out of his players, and yet at the same time make the adjustments during the course of the game, in the X's and O's game, in order to affect the outcome. And that is not all that common, if you can believe that, in the NHL. A lot of it is all the work you do leading up to the game and then allow the players to decide the outcome.
Right.
Marco could actually make in-game adjustments based on what he's seeing. And all coaches try that, but I have the sense that that's one of his strengths.
Yeah. So many things just to go back to the discussion from last season. I am still shocked that they didn't have a deal for Swayman set when they decided to trade Allmark. Like, having it last all summer was pretty surprising. With Sturm coming on, I know the Bruins are keeping on goalie coach Bob, who will hopefully work his magic to help Swayman regain his form. That's going to be so important for Sturm and the team. Were you surprised that they only brought in one new assistant coach, retaining Essensa, Chris Kelly, Jay Leach, or do you think that continuity is important for Sturm as well?
Well, if you take them one by one, you already touched on goalie Bob. They think he's just one of the best in the business, so why move off him?
Yeah.
I think they have tremendous belief in the growth and the development of a coach in Chris Kelly. I think they can envision him, whether he's coaching the Bruins, but he's a head coach in the making, still not, still marinating, however you want to describe it. Sure. And a guy that is a great penalty killer, great in the face-off circle as a player. So he has value. He understands the defensive end of the game, certainly from the forward position. Jay Leach was, in the mix. They were talking about the head coach. So that tells you what they think of him. So I can understand keeping all three guys, but they did need to add. And Marco Sturm at his press conference said, we're going to add somebody, and it's going to help evolve our offense. And he's going to have some really good power play success experience. Right. And I think that's what they think they added. So not surprised. I was surprised by the candidate because I didn't know him very well. I talked to a buddy of mine that's in the Sharks organization that knows him from at points in his career. And he spoke very highly of him as far as his creativity and his understanding and evaluating the players and how best to use them in a 5-on-4 situation. So I'm looking forward to watching some of that this year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember I live in Guelph, Ontario, just down the road from Kitchener. Steve Spott, that is, was the head coach of the Rangers for a bit.
Yep.
Worked a lot with, I made the connection last week. He got the most out of pending unrestricted free agent and Jeff Skinner in his draft year. I think he scored 50 goals in the OHL, which kind of leads us to, this is a big week for the Bruins. We're a couple days away from the draft. Free agency begins next week. Maybe let's start with the draft without having to name like specific players. What do you think the Bruins approach should be at the draft? Just the best available player, position, or there's, some talk out there that they might be considering trading the 7th overall pick. What do you think is the best course of action there for Don Sweeney heading into the draft?
Yeah, if I could just put a ribbon on the Marco Sturm conversation before we move on to the draft. The three things that I believe in, and I believe Marco believes in it as well, based on my conversations with him, is the three center pillars of a highly competitive quality hockey team in the NHL is goaltending, team defense, and strength down the middle. And I think the Bruins failed in all three categories last year. So we can talk about evolving the offense, but those are the three areas that need to be the basis of what the team is. So maybe the success that Swayman had in the World Championships will put him in a frame of mind. Just the fact that he has to atone for last year should put him in the right frame of mind.
Elias Lindholm as well, hopefully.
Yeah, I have belief in Jeremy Swayman, and I think the Bruins do too. The team defense, man, like it's always been there for the Bruins, and they play a different style in their own zone. It's not man on man; it's a bit of a hybrid. There's certain cues where you release, let someone else pick up the guy that you are covering, and you sag back to the slot, protect the dangerous, whatever it might be, and then you need better center ice play, right? I mean. They went out and spent a lot of money in free agency, and I think everybody was excited about it. Maybe not so much Zadorov, but certainly, Lindholm. They thought they were getting a quality first, top 1A center, 1C, whatever you want to call him, and he underperformed. So they're going to need better center ice play, and I don't know what the centers are going to look like. I don't know if Middlestad's part of this Bruins team moving forward.
Yep.
Can Fraser Mitten, can he be one of the young guys that needs to pop? Because you're not going to be a complete team unless some of these young guys develop into everyday players and help you win a lot of hockey games. So those three areas, I think, will be the challenge for Sturm if he's going to evolve this team and get it back to where it should be. Now, draft. I was talking with Judd Surratt earlier today, as a matter of fact, and we talked for probably 25 minutes, but we probably should have talked for 2 hours because there were just so many issues to discuss.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the draft. I told him that from my perspective on the draft, and I don't do deep dives on the draft. It's not what I do. But to me, it seems like this draft this year, the top 5, which are usually locks for people that draft, the teams that are drafting in the top 5, that may be the case. But that top 5 isn't like, 2003.
Right.
If you remember that draft. That whole first round was insane how good it was.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like that, but there's tremendous value in the back end of the first round, second and third rounds, value picks. And you think about that 2011 Stanley Cup team and the guys that were so important to winning, they were second and third round guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that being said, I can imagine the Bruins making a trade during round 1. Now, are they going to try to trade up to get inside that top 5, or are they going to go backwards because they think that there's maybe 10 players, whether they're 7 or 15. Right. So if you work backwards, maybe you make a deal with a team where you can get a guy that's probably making a little too much money for that team that he's on, but he's a quality NHL player and a need for you.
Right.
Yet you still stay in the top 15 in the first round of this year, knowing you got 2 first rounders next year and 2 after that. And maybe that draft capital, and that's a conversation for a little bit later. That gets used in the off season further down the line once we get into July and we get into free agency. So that's my view of what might happen on Friday.
Right. Wow, that'd be interesting to see Gary Bettman get up there, and we have a trade to announce.
I would add that I'm also a believer of you draft the best player available regardless of position. I know the Bruins are trying to strengthen themselves down the middle, but no, I take the best player available.
Right. Now, when it comes to free agency, Bruins got something done the other day, signing Mason Lohrei to a pretty reasonable bridge deal, I think. Probably still need to add on the right side. Definitely need to add on the wings. Is that kind of your sense as well, where they should be prioritizing after hopefully getting Morgan Geekie re-signed as well?
Yeah, Geekie should be front burner stuff right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I expect that to get done. Even when he wasn't scoring, you still liked him as a player. I thought his compete was really high. He don't underestimate his speed and his strength. He'll surprise you. Just because he looks different on the ice, he gets it done, and he's a hard guy to handle. And when he was shot first mentality, the minute he crossed the blue line, it made him really dangerous because the kid can shoot the puck. And I think everybody envisions him staying right where he is, play with Pasternak. It's just a matter, will it be Lindholm in the middle? So, right. But I think that I would love, I talked about team defense and I talked about center ice play. So that's my attention. And I love teams that can roll out. If you got to shorten your bench in a game, a 1-goal game, important game, I want to have 3 reliable defensemen. Okay, so if you believe McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm are your 1 and 2, who's your 3 right now? That's a question for me.
Yeah.
Right? It was Carlo. Carlo, good, big kid, 6'5", right shot defenseman, defender, penalty killer. That has such value in this league. There's not a ton of those guys. I would like to have him be the 3. And he didn't have a great year last year. Nobody did, except for Pasta. Great half, but and Geekie. But yeah, I would pay attention to that. I'm looking for, is it going to be Zadorov? Is it going to be Lohrei? Who is that third defenseman that I can rely on in key situations when I'm playing against teams that have really good depth? So I think that should be a concern for Boston.
For sure. Yeah. There's
up front, you need more NHL scorers.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to that 11 team, and I shouldn't because it's ancient history now. We're in 2025.
Yeah.
So, but Michael Ryder played third line.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bona fide NHL goal scorer.
Yep.
And if you're gonna have a guy like Middlestad in your top 9, he needs an NHL player.
Yep.
He can't play with 2 kids that don't really grasp how to play in the NHL yet, and that are going to learn on the job. That's only going to hurt a guy like Middlestad if he's going to be part of your team.
Right.
So that's what I'm looking for. Do you get it in free agency? Do you get it in a trade? I don't know. I don't know which direction they're going to go. I don't think Donnie Sweeney will be jaded by last year's, dip into free agency. Anybody that signs right after noontime on July 1st gets too much money and too many years.
Yeah.
It's the price of doing business.
Yeah. I
expect both those players, Zadorov and Lindholm, to be much better than they were a year ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And Lohrei, hopefully as well. Everybody's knocking him for the league low plus minus, but he was playing well above what was expected of him with all the injuries last year. So hopefully that kind of more sheltered role, I guess, will just help his development as well.
He signs a new deal, Ian, right? As you mentioned. Yeah. And that's a good thing. Bruins, they evaluate the player and they say there's the upside way outweighs the downside. Right. We get him to understand the importance of playing without the puck. So we get him to believe that if you want to be an NHL player, you have to learn to compete harder from your own blue line back.
Right.
And I'm sure those were the conversations they had with him before they made the deal.
That makes sense.
Yep.
I just had a couple questions about a couple of the other young guys. Obviously, a lot of noise around Matt Poitras, Fabian Lysell. Do you see either of those two being NHL ready to start next season? Or, with Lysell, is it time to cut bait, or where do you still see him fitting in specifically?
I saw enough from him at the end of the year, and it's always tough to evaluate at that point in the year when the season's basically over.
Yeah.
But I saw enough that I hadn't seen prior that maybe he took a step in the right direction in terms of what it takes to play in this league and how bad you want to play. Yes. And I don't get close to the players, and that always hurts the evaluation for me because I'm not sure what their inner makeup is. What is their DNA? How bad do you want to play in the NHL? Where do you come from? What's your background? Are you a trust fund kid? You don't need the game, Or were you a guy that had to do everything you could to play up a level? Those are the things I don't You try to get to know them, but you got to
Sure.
keep your distance in the job that I do.
Right.
Certainly from my perspective. But I did see enough from him that I would give him another opportunity, but it would be a final opportunity.
Right.
Poitras, he thinks the game really well.
Mm-hmm.
And he needs to mature. He needs to mature off the ice, and he certainly needs to mature as a hockey player. And you hope your time in the American League and the playoff experience in the American League and the success that you can possibly have in the American League will put you on the right track. He has to be a better skater.
Right.
But I like the way he thinks the game, and I think the Bruins like the way he thinks the
Mm-hmm.
game. He's a good small ice player, the give and go, how to draw or play it to you, then find the open man. But when you try to get separation, because a lot of teams play man on man, the minute you make a cut, that's where you have to get an extra stride to get separation to give yourself the time and space to make the play. And he doesn't have that in his game yet.
Mm-hmm.
And until I see that, he's still
Right.
at the American League level to me.
Right.
Despite his hockey IQ.
Fair. Yep. You mentioned Don Sweeney. He's got to get a lot of things right this summer. I think we can agree the coach was great. Not a lot of GMs. Very few get to hire 3 new head coaches. I think the average is like 2.3 or something like that.
Yeah.
We got the draft, free agency coming up. How confident are you that this past season is just a blip and the Bruins are back in playoff contention in 2026?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it in the blip category because there's just so many issues and there's so many ifs coming into this season. Is it fixable? Yes. Do they have to hit on every one of them? No. I think it's the reason Donnie got a new contract, but only a 2-year deal, that it is fixable. You've earned the right to try and fix it with the regular season success that you've had over the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got to fix this, and he's got to get the right coach, number one. And now as we get into the draft and we get into free agency and we get into the trade market, he's got to hit on 80% of that in terms of those decisions. And then he needs to make sure that the players that had subpar years a year ago understand why they were subpar and that they come in. And we talked about it early in this conversation. Training camp was poor and disconnected, and maybe conditioning might have even been an issue because of the way camp went. So yeah, there's a lot of ifs, there's a lot of maybes, there's a lot of what's going to happen. But I'm confident that this is a playoff team as opposed to what they were a year ago.
Yeah.
Will they be an elite team? Well, then they'd have to hit a home run on just about every decision.
Right.
But Donnie's shown that he's bold enough to be aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Pick your phrase. They're not tearing it down and rebuilding. They are retooling. And they do have some core guys, and we haven't talked about the culture too. That took the culture took a serious hit last year.
Yeah.
And it was the envy of the National Hockey League for almost 2 decades with Chara and Bergeron. And Marchand tried to do what he could do, but he didn't get any help. Pasta did a great job in the second half, and particularly after Marchand got traded to try to be the leader. But that's not really, he's not cut out of that cloth.
Mm-hmm.
I give him high marks for what he did.
Yeah.
But you needed McAvoy to mature as a leader. Didn't happen. Injuries, subpar play. It's hard to have a voice when you're not even living up to your own expectations in that role. And he didn't get any help in terms of leadership from the big money guys, the free agent guys. And then you move on from a guy like Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo, who are quality people. So the culture took a hit. And that needs to get back, moving in the right direction, that leadership in the room, that voice in the room. And that'll be another challenge for Marco Sturm to create that. So,
and that'll
but
begin.
it's fixable. I'm optimistic. I'm a realist, but I'm optimistic that they're going to make some good decisions and put this team back in a better position than they were a year ago.
It'll be interesting to see who gets the C on that nice new jersey.
Yeah,
it'll be.
You a fan of the new jersey?
I am.
The
I
old
always
jersey?
love the logo that is on the hat. I've always loved that logo. I love the cleaner look on the shoulders. Get rid of the just the shoulder patch, the black, the white. I love that. I love that so much. I'm really excited to see that back.
Yeah.
One comment on the leadership there. I feel like Lindholm and Zadorov kind of stepped up once those longtime leaders were out of the room. And I think I can see them, especially Zadorov. He was pretty outspoken. I can see them kind of jumping up, but the captain, that's going to be an interesting one for sure to see who it is, whether it's, Pasta, McAvoy are probably the two to choose from there, and it'll be interesting where they go with that for sure.
Let me ask you this: when Chara came in,
Mm-hmm.
he came in saying, "I'm going to be the captain of this team.
Yeah,
I'm going to get this Bruins team back to what it's supposed to be and should be."
Yep.
And is there a guy in the league, that could do that? That's a free agent right now.
Free agent, yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah,
I don't know. I guess
if there is, but I'm just thinking out loud if that's a possibility,
possibly.
or does it come from within the core that already exists?
I think it comes from within, unless they maybe take a big swing on a guy like Aaron Ekblad, maybe coming off 2 cups, captain of or a leader in Florida.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Maybe next summer, Jack Eichel, if they can make a big swing at him.
Yeah,
who knows? But yeah, that'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah.
All right. One last question I always like to ask people. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Just kind of a fun one. I see a lot of books on your shelf back there. I don't know if you have any either book recommendations or a movie you saw lately that people should check out. Something on Netflix you've been watching. What apart from the rink will you do to entertain yourself over the summer?
Well, I am an avid reader, and I set a very modest goal for myself that I read a book a month.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes I'm reading 2 at the same time.
Yep.
And depending on where I am, what I'm doing, how much golf I'm playing in the off season. But I'm just about done with a book called The Alienist.
Okay.
And it's about, it's about using forensic evidence to solve serial killer murder cases.
Yeah.
And it's what do they call that? It's like fiction, but it's based on
right. Yep.
So it's factual, but it reads as a novel. So cool. I'm just about done with that. But at the same time, I'm rereading Eternal Summer.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you know that book about 1960 and the U.S. Open and
yeah.
Ben Hogan and Arnie Palmer and Jack and what that was going on. And
yeah.
It also gives you the good history of 1913 with Francis Ouimet, and then Byron Nelson when he won 11 straight in the 50s, and then Ben Hogan with the Triple Crown when he played 6 tournaments in 1 year after the car crash. He won 5 of them, and it was the Masters, U.S. Open, and the British. Yeah. So there's some great golf history in there, and it's an easy read, a quick read. So I'm reading those 2 right there. So I would recommend both of those. And then if it's in the hockey season, where you can't really stay with a book, consistently because you're doing doing 3 games in 5 nights or whatever it is. I'll read like a Stephen King book where it's a compilation of.
He's got a new one out.
12 short stories, so you can pick it up anytime and not lose your place.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll read a book like that.
Very cool. Speaking of him, I just read It for the first time just this past month. That was a wild ride. And going back to the Alienist one, I'm actually reading right now a book about kind of the high concentration of serial killers in like the Pacific Northwest in the 60s and 70s.
Like Manson?
Manson, Ted Bundy, Jerry Brudos, and kind of how it all came out of like lead poisoning in the air and stuff like that. Like how it's really interesting, called Murderland. It just came out. It's if that's your thing, it's pretty interesting to read about all that stuff as well. Well, Andy, I cannot thank you enough for taking some time to chat today. It's been great to connect. Hopefully we can do this again sometime down the road. I guess you got some golf games coming up this week, free agency, the draft. It's all going to be a pretty great. Are you guys doing any draft coverage?
Yeah, we are. I'm glad you asked. So Saturday night after the completion of the amateur draft, we will do a recap show on NESN starting at, we're shooting for 8:00. It'll be after the Red Sox game.
Okay.
And then we will do the same typical timetable or same timetable on July 1 around 8 p.m. We'll kind of recap what happened on day 1 of free agency.
Very nice. And who's going to be on? You, Judd, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm not sure who the best person. I don't know what the panel is going to be, but I'm sure Billy will be involved. Judd will be involved. I think Sophia is going to host it both times.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, big fan of Sophia, Canadian product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thing down there. Glad to have her back.
Great teammate.
As well, yeah. Well, thanks again, Andy. We'll touch base later on, and have a great rest of the summer.
I enjoyed our conversation, Ian, and I look forward to the next time we chat.
Yes, thank you. Well, that was fantastic. So great to chat with Andy Brickley. I hope you all enjoyed that as well. To everyone listening, watching, don't forget to subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss daily coverage all off-season long. Please do take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and always, let's go Bruins. Talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.